Welcome back to BlackHat 2025. It's our last interview. It's day 3. We're recording live from the CyberRisk TV studio here at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. Our last, but not our least interview. I'm your host, Matt Alderman, and joining me for this final interview of BlackHat is Matt Muller. He's the field CISO at Tynes. Welcome, Matt.
It's good to be here.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, I know. It's been a little while.
It has been a little while. I have a little history with Tynes. So we're going to talk about the traditional SOC.
Right.
What I used to, it's almost like the advanced SOC, right? If we go back in history, go back 20 some years, we had the old legacy SOC SIM, right? And I was saying this before, I always said SIM wasn't built for security, it was built for compliance. And I used to have this argument with Anton Shavakin and others, but it was trying to validate certain compliance checks. And so we reinvented the security operations centers in the 12, 13, 14, 15 time frame. We saw the expansion of security orchestration platforms, the SOAR platforms, and we saw this huge consolidation of the SOAR platforms being bought by the SIM vendors and getting integrated together. And here we are, and the SOC's still broken.
It really is. And if you think about sort of, the history and the inspirations almost that the SOC came from, I look at, the NOC, obviously,
yes.
and also the IT service desk, right? Like the Security Operations Center itself, even though it's not a young function, is still younger than a lot of these other teams, right? And so, thinking about, for example, in the IT world, if you have a laptop and the screen breaks, you go fix that screen, right? But it only fixes that one laptop. You have one ticket, you have one person that needs to go solve that ticket end to end with a particular workflow, and then you hand it back, right? It doesn't tell you anything else about other laptops. Fixing that one screen doesn't actually fix a class of laptop screens.
Right.
There's no, malicious adversary whose intent you have to sort of guess,
What's
right?
to break the screen.
Yeah, it's either broken or it's not broken, right? And if you think about how the traditional SOC operates, it's inspired by a lot of that model, whether people realize that or not, right? And so you think about a junior analyst gets a ticket, they solve that one ticket, they hand it off. We're not thinking about solving classes of problems in the traditional SOC model. And so to me, it's kind of no wonder that we're still seeing the same problems, right? And still seeing the same issues of burnout and alert fatigue, which I'm fatigued of hearing the term alert fatigue at this point.
Yeah.
But again, no matter what all the stuff we've done to address these issues, I think have been band-aids, right? Because it doesn't really reimagine why we're operating this way.
So how do we reinvent the SOC? Like, I really like to think about these long-term, like strategic kind of discussions, right? Which is, we've been doing it so long for a certain way, we're not making any progress. Like, how do you reinvent it? Like, how do you literally flip it on its head, right? And some vendors in the space will be like, oh, you can't do that, right? But I'm like, no, you can. Now, I'll give you a really good example, just a quick one. In 2015, when I was running strategy at Tenable, I wrote a thesis that said, look, in a future world, I don't own the network, I don't own the device, everything's in the cloud, everything's an application front end through a browser. What do you scan when you don't own a network, right? It was a crazy hypothesis at the time. It's now true. And the pandemic only sped it up, right? So what do we do? Like, how do we hypothesize the future of the SOC, and how do we start to rebuild it in a new, better way?
I think the first thing is looking at the role of the junior analyst. There's been a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt about, will AI replace all of our junior analysts? I think the first response is, okay, well, if you replace all your junior analysts, where do your senior analysts come from, first of all?
Right.
But if you actually think about what junior analysts do today, we ask them to make the most decisions out of anybody in the Security Operations Center because they're doing all the triage. But then they don't get to see the consequences of those decisions because it gets escalated to tier 2 or tier 3 to actually respond and do the work. And that kind of makes sense, right? You need some expertise when it comes to actually doing incident response. But I think the first thing we need to reimagine is, what would it look like to empower a junior security analyst to take an alert as far as they possibly could? And it might look different for different analysts, right? And you find the ones that can take it further and further and further. Those are the ones who are becoming your tier 2 and tier 3 folks. Right. But the tooling that we give those people is incredibly important, right? Because you want those junior analysts to feel comfortable and feel empowered to go make decisions and go take actions, and also not have the SOC manager sort of worried in the back of their mind, like, are they gonna, delete production? Are they gonna lock the CEO out of their email? That sort of thing.
Well, so you bring up a very good point. Part of this is, do we just get rid of the tiers, right? So you just said it. I got a tier 1, a tier 2, tier 3. I'm escalating up. Okay. well, is that really the right model? Maybe we don't have tiers. Maybe it's flat, or maybe we only have 2 tiers, right? Because here's what AI is going to do for us, right? It is going to empower less senior people with capabilities to advance very, very quickly. Right. Whether we truly have a skill gap in the industry or not, and there's a big debate on that, and we talk about that a lot on different podcasts, but let's assume that we partially do. AI will enable those folks to move up and mature faster. Maybe I don't need to hire other junior analysts, and maybe the whole tiering structure of the SOC is partially broken. Maybe it's obsolete in the new world.
I tend to agree. And, I think models that we're seeing folks experiment with more that are being really successful, honestly, is take your senior folks, let them do something, just a really deep dive, right? Maybe it's cloud security. Figure out how you want to do incident response in the cloud. Have them build some sort of automations or workflows or AI prompts that replicate that work, and then empower the junior analysts to go use those workflows.
Yeah, so they almost become like research people.
Right.
Right? So you take your most senior people with your best skill set, they research how to respond to certain types of attacks, build a set of agentic AI capabilities and an agent that you now empower the junior people to be able to execute, and guess what? I don't need to escalate it to the senior folks. So the senior folks become these almost like researchers in that world, right?
Yeah, and I mean, these folks love it, right? Because every security person I know is incredibly curious. They love learning, they love tinkering. And you tell them, hey, guess what? Your job is to now go tinker with AWS and just become an expert in AWS. Once you've done that, guess what? You're no longer the AWS person. You're not going to, be stuck being the only person who can answer AWS questions. You can now move on. Go learn GCP. Go learn Azure, right? And then replicate everything that you've been doing. So to me, that feels like a really powerful way to apply both, AI, as a co-pilot, AI as an agent, or even, blend it with traditional automation, right? Where you need to have deterministic guardrails. And make sure that, again, the junior folks can feel confident pushing that button and getting the outcomes that the senior folks have figured out are the best ones to have.
Yeah. What happens to our tooling with AI? I mean, I can imagine, I know it's already being used in the SOC, primarily more from a co-pilot perspective, which I get, right? LLMs are really good at giving us context, right? It's really fast. You give it some data, it contextualizes it. It doesn't hallucinate as much as people say. I've done some really simple tests with it, and it's pretty damn accurate, right? So it's definitely speeding up the triage piece, but is our existing tooling ready to orchestrate the next set of activities? As I said in the opening kind of remarks, is we saw this huge consolidation of the SIEM and SOAR platforms. I still don't see as much automation on the playbook side that I thought I would see. Like Nirvana, I think in the industry is, if I can trust a set of activities to happen, why not automate them? It makes us more efficient. We don't need as many resources, but I still don't see that kind of adoption. Is it a tooling problem, or is it a trust problem, or a combination of both? Like, where do we go from here?
I think it can be a combination of both, and especially if you look at today's SaaS world, where we're responsible for defending an attack surface that has just sprawled, right?
Oh my God,
and it's all in the US East 1 still, but it's absolutely sprawled. And a lot of these tools that the business now relies on are a little bit less mature in terms of maybe the permission models that they have inside those tools, right? And maybe I can only grant a super admin API key or nothing in those tools. I'm a little bit more nervous about turning that over to AI and automation, right? If the AI can do anything in the tool, do I want it to be able to do anything within the tool? And by the same token, is everything available over API? Not everything is, right? ClickOps are still very real. And so, we sort of look at this at times as, part of the problem that we're helping to solve, which is adding on the layers of control on top of these SaaS platforms, which everybody in the business needs, everybody in the business uses, but maybe aren't as mature from a security perspective. So I do think there is some maturity both in the attack surface that we're defending as well as the security tools that we use to defend it.
Yeah, so when you think about putting those kind of checkpoints in place, describe I want to call it an orchestration for lack of a better term, but what does that look like, right? Like, kind of explain it to the listeners, because I think it's really, I've researched your platform primarily for some other use cases to see how you can use it to orchestrate some other things. But walk me through an orchestration and how you can build these workflows, and how do those checkpoints come into play, and how does that drive, like, a SOC response process?
Yeah, I think a big one is around consensus controls, right? The idea that to perform dangerous actions, at least one human, maybe more than one human, should be in the loop, right? To make sure that the actual outcome is what you want.
Right.
Most platforms don't have the notion of consensus built in, right? Even some of the major cloud players, you can, if you have the admin keys, you can go do whatever you want.
Right.
And so, what we say is, well, if you build this response workflow within Tines, now you can actually add in those consensus controls. Maybe your AI agent, for example, is the one determining that, yes, we actually do want to take this response action. Let me surface that to a human, have the human validate that this is a sane action. We're not deleting production, and then perform it, right? Or maybe a junior analyst thinks that the right course of action is X, Y, or Z. That can quickly be escalated to a senior person within the SOC to say, yep, sounds like they're doing the right thing. I approve. Let's make sure the action happens, right?
Yeah. So now you get a mix of machine and human,
right?
Which is, I guess, the nirvana state, because I don't see people turning over response fully to AI, right?
Yeah.
However, if you can marry AI with decision processing, that's what. Look, at the end of the day, we're all building decision support systems, right? So if I can surface up something that a human can make a really easy decision on, say, yep, that makes sense, and then downstream it does its thing, we're becoming more efficient in our operations teams, right? And I see a ton of use cases for AI. I've built a couple in my day job, and I can see how AI is definitely going to change the world of the SOC. So that balance of both machine and human is going to be important. How do we think about protecting aspects of that, though, as well? Because we don't want it to fall into the wrong hands either. So do we have to rethink kind of identity and access in this environment to put some better controls in place of some of these tools and systems as well?
I absolutely think so. And there's sort of a real philosophical question around, if an AI agent is acting, on behalf of the team, whose identity is that?
Right.
Is it just a service account? Is this a non-human identity? Is this something else entirely, a brand new thing? And I do think that when we start to let the AI do more on our behalf, there absolutely is, to your point, just a need to sort of think through these things from an IAM perspective, right? And getting a little bit more granular and saying, a human who is uncertain about the decision to make will probably back off, right? And maybe ask somebody for advice or guidance and not necessarily use the credential until they're confident.
Yeah.
An AI that's incorrect is just going to confidently plow forward, right? And so we have to account for that and not just say like, oh, right, this is yet another identity, right? There's more nuance to it and figuring out, is this AI acting in the right context, with the right circumstances?
With the right permissions, the right access. Because I brought this up, I think it was on Tuesday in one of the interviews, because I get questioned all the time, like, how do you validate what the agent's doing? Right. And he's like, well, you have other controls in place, or you should have other controls in place.
Hopefully.
You should treat the agent like a non-human identity. It should have credentials and authentication and all these other things. You have insider threat tools that should monitor certain things. And if it does something malicious, it should set off a bunch of alarms, right?
Yeah.
So he says, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, was kind of his point, which was just because AI is being used doesn't mean that our other tool sets are not valid anymore. They're absolutely valid as how we protect some of the aspects of what the agent's doing and how it gets access to things.
Yeah, and in a way, I think it maybe exposes a little bit of how we've relied maybe too much on policy to determine authorization versus code as authorization, for example, right? And look, if our humans are just relying on a runbook to say, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. That to me is a great indicator that maybe that's a spot to rethink your access controls generally, right? Because if you're relying on a human to make the right decision not to use a credential in a certain way, that's something an attacker can take advantage of as well, right? And so I do think that solving this problem for AI also helps solve it in the sense of making our systems more resilient as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we blow up the 3-tier system, we relook at our tooling, we embrace AI. Is there anything else we need to do in the SOC to get us to the next? I'll call it next generation. I hate that term, but to get to the next evolution of the SOC.
We got to start measuring the right things. If reporting the number of incidents that we handled to the board doesn't tell anyone anything about how well we're doing, how stressed we are, or if we need to do things differently, right? And I think in the Security Operations Center in particular, the killer is your true positive, false positive ratios. That's your analyst mental health is dictated by that, right? And at the end of the day, there's a lot of MTT star metrics out there. Personally, the one I like to drive is mean time to detect, right? We want to find the adversary. We want to drive them out. That's why the people join this team in the first place, right? They want to find the bad guys.
Right.
So let's measure how well we're doing at that, right? And not just sort of, metrics of the number of tickets handled per analyst or things like that.
Yeah, well, we talk about that a lot on BSW and how number of incidents is not the right metric for sure.
Yeah.
Matt, been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Matt, thank you so much.
Yes. If you want to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/timesbh. For all your BlackHat content, visit securityweekly.com/BlackHat. Matt, thank you again.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It was great. Stay tuned. We're going to do the final wrap up for BlackHat 2025.